Good morning and welcome to the Public Safety Committee. I am the chair, Tom Amiano. I'm joined currently by committee members Jerry Hill, Warren Furutani. I believe Mr. Nielsen was here. So we do have a quorum. And I have some housekeeping things. If we could keep the doors closed. Mr. Hagman coming in. Yeah. Mr. Gilmore. All right, if you want to call the roll.
Amiano.
Here.
Amiano here. Hagman.
Here.
Hagman. Aye. Furutani.
Here.
Gilmore.
Here.
Hill.
Here.
Skinner.
All right, and we do have a quorum. I have a couple of housekeeping things. On the consent calendar, we have Mr. Bell. And could I have a motion? Move second. All right, done. And do we need a roll? Okay.
Amiano.
Aye. I'm sorry. Yes, aye.
Hagman.
Aye.
Furutani.
Aye.
Gilmore.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Skinner. Vacancy. Consent calendar is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And also we have three bills that have been pulled by the author. Number one, AB 1641, Mr. Hall. Number two, AB 1661, Mr. Nelson. And number three, SB 525, Padilla. Okay. And I see that Mr. Jeffries is here. So, Mr. Jeffries, if you'd like to come up and address your bill, AB 1688.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. This bill will add the crime of illicitly taping a person with sexual intent without their consent to the list of registrable sex offenders or offenses. For example, current law requires that in order for a suspect to be charged with a registrable sex offense with regards to the illicit taping of a child, the child must be posed or the child must be modeled. This definition fails to protect children, for example, who are being taped for the purposes of sexual arousal without their knowledge. Despite the fact that illicit taping is an overtly sexually motivated offense perpetrated against individuals without their knowledge, there is no registration requirement associated with it. These individuals are just as dangerous and as much of a threat as those who currently register for sex crimes. This illicit behavior often leads to other more severe sex offenses. With a registration requirement, the public will be further protected from sexual offenders. In fact, the San Francisco District Attorney calls this proposal a critical bill for public safety. While I understand the concerns of the opponents, who actually never sent us their letters of opposition, with regards to expanding the sex offender registry, preventing further sex crimes should outweigh the fact that more convicted criminals would be required to register. This bill, in fact, is sponsored by the Riverside County District Attorneys Association. It is supported by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, the Napa County District Attorney's Office, and the Orange County District Attorney's Office. With me to answer any questions and testify to this bill is Rob Hightower, with the District Attorney's Office in Riverside County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. I just want to make a couple things clear. First of all, since this is a misdemeanor offense to begin with, failure to register would be a misdemeanor too. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Yes.
So we're not looking at throwing a bunch more people in the prison because they failed to register, but this keeps track of those people who commit this crime, which right now in the current statute we do not. And plus the public has no disclosure notice, right?
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Mr. Hightower?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. There's just a few things I wanted to point out with regard to the analysis. The first is Assemblyman Hagman pointed out, on page 3 of the analysis, it indicates that those who fail to register as a sex offender would be guilty of a felony. Because this is misdemeanor conduct, the underlying offense is misdemeanor conduct, any violation of Section 290 would be a misdemeanor as well. Also, on page 4 of the analysis, one of the issues brought up is the fact that there are not a great deal of limitations on this bill, and I would take issue with that. First of all, there are a number of misdemeanor offenses which are already considered serious enough to be registrable as sex offenders, including sexual battery of an individual, annoying or molesting a child, which is a misdemeanor offense, as well as indecent exposure, which is also a misdemeanor offense. So simply the fact that this bill is a misdemeanor does not mean it is any less serious or that the victims of this bill are any less desirous of having their offenders register. I will just point out to the court that in addition to the counties mentioned by Assemblyman Jeffries, the Tulare County District Attorney's Office was also in support of this bill. And more specifically, as the San Francisco District Attorney points out, using children as objects for sexual arousal is a despicable crime, and the Penal Code must require those convicted of this crime to register as sex offenders. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee does have.
Yes, I do have one question. I recognize the Vice Chair. But I want a clarification. It's already a misdemeanor to video record a person without their consent?
It is a video, but it is not registrable as a sex offense.
All right. Even if it's not intended?
Regardless of the, again, the 647J2, which is the underlying section, has a sexual intent requirement on it. So in order to be guilty of that section, it must not simply be taping an individual, but taping with a sexual intent. Even when they have that requisite intent under the current law, they are not required to register as a sex offender.
And then how would that be enforced? How do you know about the intent of a person? How would they?
Well, in order to be guilty of the offense to begin with, a jury has to find that they were, in fact, not only guilty of taping the person, but they also have to have acted with that intent, that sexual intent. So in order for them to even be guilty of this offense, to even get to registration, a jury has to find, or they have to plead, that they were actually committing the offense with a sexually motivated intent.
And the criminal justice system is already overburdened, so this would put yet another duty on them.
I don't necessarily agree with that, simply because a lot of times this leads to more egregious conduct, and a lot of these individuals would probably have to register if they were guilty of other crimes. We're talking about a relatively small portion that are simply falling through the cracks that we're not getting to, and they're not registering, and individuals are not knowing. One specific case that we had out of our office is where a man had actually carved a hole out of a backpack and was walking around a carnival taping little girls as they rode on the carnival rides up their skirts. He was only charged with this section, and if convicted, that individual will not be required to register as a sex offender, and no matter where he lives, people will not know that he was engaging in this type of behavior.
My concern is that we get a little overzealous in these areas, and we want to make sure that the assumption of guilt is verifiable. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the last point, on a first offense, misdemeanor, this section of the Penal Code, is that jail time in your county? Or prison time, I should say.
It's not prison time.
Correct.
And a matter of fact, most judges probably don't give them jail time for this type of an offense, and it would be local time anyway. It
So,
would not be
but
prison.
basically, the purpose, besides having the mark on there, but you basically tracking them to watch them for further behavior, so they don't go to the bad, even worse offenses at this point.
Exactly. It is simply a tool that we can use to track these individuals, and so our felony enforcement teams can make sure that they're complying with those provisions.
And when you have them on a register status, it gives those enforcement teams more tools on the toolbox to deal with individuals, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, second thing is I noticed that this is not automatically compliant with Megan's Law. Is that the author's intent? Or you would have to, I guess, amend that to make it so at this point?
It would eventually, we would have to do that to
But
make
it's not in the statute, so this does not add on to the Megan's Law
That's correct.
tracking
not at
capability.
this time.
Thank you.
Before I call on Mr. Gilmore, I just want to clarify, this just isn't about taping minors. You keep bringing that up, but it's not just about minors.
That's correct, and that's not unique to the registration requirements. 243.4, which is a sexual battery offense, which is also a misdemeanor, also covers individuals who are minors as well as adults, and they are currently required to register.
Just a clarifying question. We have a conviction, and all this bill is doing is clarifying and requiring a registration, correct?
That's exactly correct.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, they don't, in order for them to be even convicted of this offense, it has to be with sexual intent.
Do we have any testimony in support? Yes, Mr. Furutani.
Thank you. This law, it doesn't have any age requirement or any age restriction of the individual that's doing the filming, or to get, I know they have to go to court and stuff, but
Well, in order for the person who's doing the filming, if it were in adult court, then obviously they would have to register because they're an adult, and that's what Section 290 requires.
so they have to be an adult.
That's correct. In order to be convicted in adult court, they would have to be an adult in the first place.
How many other states have this?
There are a number of states that have voyeurism laws that are currently in place. 2 states, at least at this point in time, because this is such a new area of law, because technology has changed substantially over the last 10 or 15 years. I can tell you, 4 or 5 years ago, perpetrators weren't really using MySpace and Facebook in order to target offenders, but with changes in technology, cell phones now having video capabilities, there's a lot of states that haven't come on board yet, and those of us in the state of California know technology better than most other states across the country, and we're at the forefront of that and trying to prosecute these individuals who are finding new and creative ways to prey on individuals with a sexual intent.
Again, the question, how many states?
As of right now, there are 2 states that require registration.
And they are?
North Dakota, as well as South Carolina.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. In a follow-up to Mr. Furutani's question, you mentioned that for adults, it would be registration if they were convicted of this with sexual intent. What about a minor in the same situation? If a minor were convicted of the same offense?
A minor falls in an entirely different category as far as Section 290 is concerned. As I'm sure you know, Assemblyman, in order for an individual to have to be tried in adult court, there's a number of hoops they have to jump through. Because this is a misdemeanor offense, this is not the type of offense that would cover a minor who's convicted and being required to register. They would have to be tried in adult court or have a minor offense that qualifies for 290, and this isn't one of them.
Thank you.
Any witnesses in support? Any in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Liberty Sanchez on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association. I'd first like to apologize that you were not in receipt of the letter. I promise I faxed it, and I have a copy for you that I will hand to you.
Thank you.
Our main concern has to do with the current overpopulation on the registry. California has the highest registration population in the country. We have 90,000 registrants. One in every 157 adult males in California is a registrant. The California Sex Offender Management Board, after an extensive study and extensive evidence-based research, made a determination and released a report recently which suggested that California should go to a risk-based system, not only to reduce the large population of registrants we have, but to be able to better focus the really limited resources of law enforcement and DOJ to track the truly violent registrants who are most prone to recidivism. We believe that this bill, has a contradictory approach to the evidence-based research that has recently been released, and for those reasons we oppose.
David Warren, Taxpayers for Improving Public Safety, and also Mr. Jeffries. Last Thursday, I personally faxed our opposition letter to your office because I had to I wanted to make sure because I was catching an airplane. So if you haven't received a copy, I'll be glad to provide you with your office with another copy. We're opposed to this proposal for any number of reasons, including indicated in our letter. However, most importantly, because this is a misdemeanor, a person who is convicted may apply for expungement of this crime at some point down the line after they rehabilitated themselves. But once they're on the list for life. And I would indicate to you as one extraordinary serious example of unintended consequences. Unfortunately, young people have adopted a thing called sexting, and this would certainly fall under this provision of law. some of these young people are 18 years old in high school and are adults. They would be branded as sex offenders for the rest of their lives, prohibiting them from many professions such as teaching, the medical professions, and so on, without realizing what they have done. And for that reason, I believe this proposal is so overly broad, without sufficient safeguards, that it should be rejected. Thank you.
Members?
You, you referred to sexting, and my interpretation of that is generally when someone sends a sexual picture of themselves to somebody else. So that would be without their permission, as the statute says. It has to be like a hidden camera with the person not knowing what's going on. So that does not even come in this realm, I would think.
Unfortunately, there have been a number of examples of young people in locker rooms at high schools who have been taking pictures of other people, and maybe they intend only for themselves to be involved, but other people became
But
involved.
that's illegal right there in itself. I mean, that would be punishable of that offense.
I do not disagree that it is inappropriate, illegal, but do we want these young people branded as sex offenders for the rest of their lives for doing something which was meant as a joke, although in very bad taste and obviously a violation of law?
So the second thing is the more sexual registrants, this counter that we have the most population in the state than any other state in the country. So that would kind of make sense, wouldn't it?
Actually, we've had our registry since 1947, and so while we do have a larger population and a larger population of sex registrants, the study that was undertaken by the Sex Crimes Management Board suggested that what other states have done is to pool their resources and focus on the high-risk offenders so that the limited resources don't have to be wasted on folks that are not posing a threat to the community.
But when you put someone on a list, that's what you are, is on a list. Of law enforcement many years, we sit there and focus our resources on the heaviest offenders or risk there is automatically. That takes a humanistic approach to analyzing what you have and go after those. Just because you're on that list doesn't mean those resources are divided up equally. It means that you're on the list for future tracking. So if somebody else in another county, or they move later on down the life, they follow the pattern. You know, being a psychology major, we study this stuff. This stuff is not, I'm going to go steal something today because I'm broke. This is something, a lot of times there's issues that have to be addressed, psychology issues. And that's the target base we're trying to get with these, to try to identify them early and hopefully get them in treatment so they don't go on to worse offenses later on. So that's why I see this as a tool. You're not adding a crime necessarily. You're not adding time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Furutani.
I'm just really ambivalent about this particular bill, Mr. Jeffries. I had a bill that came to this body before earlier this session on sex offenders and them being put in hotels, and this system is just so totally broke, you know, in terms of registrants and how to keep track of them, and we don't keep track of them. Adding more to the list, the thing that I'm ambivalent about is this the commentary you just made relative to. I remember during my time, there was a thing about wearing patent leather shoes. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
Yes, the Catholic school.
You know, the Catholic, yeah. I mean, what stupid things, and not that they would have been arrested for that, but this for life kind of thing. It's just getting a little bit, I'm just really ambivalent. The point about being convicted first really helps relative to your bill. But the registration, this thing is just so broken, adding more and more to it. We don't know where they are. We can't keep track of them. We don't have enough probation officers enough to even know where they are. I mean, the burden, just trying to figure out, I think we need to look at this whole thing as a macro issue relative to the whole kit and boot, you know, anyway, I'm just frustrated with it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Jeffries, would you like to close?
Just a potential rebuttal to some of the points that have been raised here, I think would be appropriate.
I just want to point out to Assemblyman Furutani, I mean, we are certainly working very, very hard. In fact, I saw a news report last night that indicated that Santa Clara County, for example, is now 93% compliant with their sex offenders, which means that they're 93% of those, they know where they are, they're making sure that they're compliant. In our county, Riverside County, we also have what's known as a SAFE team, a sexual assault felony enforcement team, and we are over 90% compliant, and counties around the country are compliant at this point. So it is a system that always needs attention, but it's not a whole lot different than a lot of other registration systems we have. With regard to the and I understand that, and certainly Los Angeles County is also working with their SAFE team to ensure enforcement, as well as the city of Long Beach is doing the exact same thing. With regard to the issue with our sexual registration list in California, which has been enacted since 1947, we've never removed anyone off of that list, and that's partly where that number is coming from the Sex Offender Management Board, and sexting would not be included within this provision, as Assemblyman Hagman pointed out. That's a completely different section. This simply requires that a person be convicted of surreptitiously taping an individual without their knowledge in using that material for a sexual purpose. These are not simply victims who are communicating back and forth with consent, knowing that the other person is taping them. These are people who are being victimized while they simply walk down the street or without anyone knowing where they are. And we're simply trying to make sure that that small portion of individuals who are only convicted of this are registered.
All right, thank you. Pleasure of the committee, is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, a second?
Mr. Chair, if I could make one comment.
Certainly.
In listening to the discussion, and I really appreciate the testimony on both sides. As much as I'd like to support Mr. Jeffries in this, I just find that the problem and the issue of the size and the difficulty in the registration and in dealing with that and controlling it and the numbers that we have today. And I just don't want to add to that for something that I don't believe really should be as part of that, at least for those that could get sucked up into it at a very young age for the rest of their life. So I'll be voting no.
All right, in my mind, it's already a misdemeanor to video record a person without their consent, and many of these who are committing this crime are not doing so in an intentionally harmful way. Often if it's a kid making a very poor decision to use a cell phone camera, and while it is wrong to take a picture or make a recording like this, it would be inappropriate to label that kid as a sex offender for the rest of his or her life. There are already too many people required to register for life as sex offenders, which may not merit the stigma they receive. I can't in good conscience make this group of people subject to that. Our criminal justice system, as I mentioned, is already overburdened, and failure to register as a sex offender is a felony. We can't afford to aggravate the current overcrowding of our prisons at this time. I won't be able to support your measure, Mr. Jeffries, and will recommend a no vote. And I guess if we could have a roll call, please.
Amiano?
No.
Hagman? Hagman, aye. Furutani? Furutani not voting. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill?
No.
Hill, no. Skinner? No. Skinner, no. The bill fails.
Okay, the bill fails. Certainly. Okay, without objection. All right, well, we will adjourn. We caught people by surprise. All right, the meeting is adjourned.